even before I started on that path and got into radio and stuff, I had a pretty good working knowledge of what we would now call classic rock. So I was up on Bob Seger and Springsteen and the late 60s bands, The Who and the Zeppelins and all that stuff. So it's just been kind of a lifelong fandom. But I did have those 7 or 8 years where it wasn't cool to say that you liked Pink Floyd or whatever.
Welcome once again to the Talking Archive. I'm Josh Jacobs, and it's an honor to be speaking with Jim McGuinn, who's both a musician as well as radio program director. Thanks for being with us.
Hey, thanks, Josh. Great to be here.
Well, tell us about your life growing up and what got you into rock and roll and eventually radio.
Ooh. All right, that's a good one. I grew up in suburban Chicago. It seems like a lot of people in radio came from the Midwest. Maybe that's just, what I've run into, but I don't know. Maybe it's something in the water. But I was a little kid in the early 70s, and I remember seeing the Monkees on Saturday mornings, not on when they were on originally in 66 and 67, but they were rerunning it on Saturday mornings. And then the local, UHF, or what was the high numbers in TV? Is that UHF or VHF? Whatever. Those high number channels,
Mm-hmm. Yeah, VHF is the high
Beatles
one.
Week. VHF, okay, VHF. Had Beatles Week. And so I had this profound impact of seeing the Monkees and then seeing Help and Yellow Submarine and A Hard Day's Night and thinking, wow, that looks cool. Rock and roll is cool, So at a very young age, I liked the idea of having your band, your gang of mates and making music and, Davy Jones's eyes twinkling when the girls walk by or whatever, and all that. So that was early on. And then I then spent middle school. I ended up being the kid that would man the turntable at the sock hop. That was my first DJ gig, I guess, playing Chicago's Color My World for the slow dance. And then my high school had a high school radio station. So really my first dive in was in the early 80s in high school in Downers Grove, Illinois, WDGC, 250 watts, but we had a pretty good audience for that time. And it was the time of both post-punk in the UK and the classic college radio of the 80s in America. So there was a ton of energy towards new music, and it didn't have anywhere to go because mainstream radio was not really there for it. So what we now think of as that classic 80s alternative music, that was the stuff that we were playing and nobody else was at the time, pretty much, except for the college stations and in this case, high school stations. So that's kind of how I got my start, And I specifically remember... Oh, go ahead.
Yeah, my parents are from Chicago, by the way. My mom grew up in Naperville, and my dad in Evanston. What were some local Chicago bands that you broke onto that radio station?
God, well, so I'm from Downers Grove, which is right next to Naperville, and Evanston is where WNUR, which was the big college station in Chicago, was based out of. And in the punk scene, there were bands like Naked Raygun in Chicago. There was this great ska band called Heavy Manners that I remember playing. There was a new wave band called Fill and the Blanks that was pretty good. And there were some bands that also crossed over a little bit maybe to the more progressive rock stations at the time, like The Loop was for a while and XRT. And so, what was that band called? There was a band called The Kind that was very power pop. That I remember that was they had a couple good tunes that got on the radio. And oh my God, local bands in Chicago in the early 80s. That is a good, deep question. I'd have to think for a minute to get past those first ones that popped into mind. So,
yeah, my mom remembers back in the 60s bands from Chicago like the Buckinghams as well as the New Colony Six and the Shadows of Night, the ones who actually had the hit with Gloria in America.
Yeah, Shadows of Night is the Gloria. And I remember being a little kid and it must have been either WLS or WCFL doing one of those, Memorial Day best songs of all time countdowns. And Kind of a Drag by the Buckinghams was number one. Which seems crazy, I guess, right? But But I remember at the time, like, that stuck with me. Like, wow, the Buckinghams have the best song ever. You know? And this must have been mid-'70s, so the song wasn't that old at the time. You know, it was a few years old. I think that was 67 or 68. So, and then, you know, Chicago, of course, is from there. And then the blues scene. And, you know, my high school station was trying to get Muddy Waters to play some benefit show because he lived in a neighboring town called Westmont, Illinois. And then he ended up passing away. But you know, yeah, it was a good time. It was very Brady Bunch, you know, but I segued from all I cared about was sports and wanting to be a sports writer to all I cared about was rock and roll and wanting to do something that had to do with music. I also had there's a thing that I don't think it makes any sense today, but if you're of a certain age and you came of age at the right point, it might. And that's like a year zero mentality where if you were into what I guess you'd call alternative music or, you know, the new wave or whatever, mm-hmm. Oftentimes you had an epiphany and then you kind of said everything from the past is irrelevant and all that matters is this now. And I had that happen to me when a friend of mine played me a song by the British band The Jam called A Town Called Malice. And I said, what is this? It sounds like The Who meets Motown. And she said, yes, exactly. And I said, why isn't this on like the Loop, you know, the big rock station in town? And she said, because commercial radio sucks. And I said, we have to change that. You know, we have to do something. And that, you know, thus my entire life's career was basically laid out for me at that moment. And I became that kid who then went all in and was all about, like the post-punk and the college rock, I guess you'd say. Mm-hmm. And it took me years to go back and go, oh, actually, Led Zeppelin's pretty good. I was wrong. That was a mistake.
You know, it's funny you mention that because Steve Jones from the Sex Pistols has a show called Jonesy's Jukebox in Southern California. And a lot of people thought, oh, it's going to be nothing but punk. But then Jonesy confessed, he says, look, at the height of the Pistols, I was listening to Boston albums and loving it. But he says, I would not tell a soul, otherwise they'd have my head on a stick.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, I think that's true of so many people. And, you know, the Clash loved Mott the Hoople, right? Mm-hmm. Like everybody has their thing that brought them to the party. And I was fortunate. I had older brothers, so I inherited some CCR records and some Beatles records and some Motown records. And even before I started on that path and got into radio and stuff, I had a pretty good working knowledge of what we would now call classic rock. So I was up on Bob Seger and Springsteen and the late 60s bands, The Who and the Zeppelins and all that stuff. So it's just been kind of a lifelong fandom. But I did have those like 7 or 8 years where it wasn't cool to say that you liked, you know, Pink Floyd or whatever. So
not even the Syd Barrett era, I guess.
Well, right. Yeah. I mean, you made an exception for Sid. Yeah. He became just like, I don't know, like Syd Barrett and Alex Chilton and Arthur Lee's Love were when I was in college, that was the cool 60s music to look back on.
Yeah. And then also you were in a indie band called Reaction Formation.
Oh my God. You've done the research. Yes.
Who are some of the up-and-coming established bands you got to open for while with Reaction Formation?
Reaction Formation. Who did we play with? Well, there was a great mod scene in Chicago, believe it or not, and we were centered around this venue that was called the West End, which was booked by a woman named Sue Miller. Sue Miller married Jeff Tweedy years later and is, you know, Jeff Tweedy of Wilco's wife, but she was a booking agent, and that scene included these bands. There was a band called I Spy. There was a band called The Slugs. And I just saw the lead guy from The Slugs, Doug Julin, who's now out on the road with Jason Narducci and Michael Shannon, the actor, doing REM, Elvis, basically, touring. So it's weird how, you know, 30 years later, you know, things like that come around. There was also a band called Material Issue from around that era as well that we would play with. And who were the bands? I'm trying to remember. There was one big band that Reaction Formation opened for, which was the Replacements. We got to open for the Replacements twice.
Wow.
And that was super cool. And at the time, though, you didn't know it was just another gig. You're like, oh, cool, we're playing with that band from Minneapolis. They're cool, you know. And then years later, if you tell someone, you're like, yeah, I opened for the Replacements, they're like, you did what? You know, it's kind of amazing. And we did that twice. Once at Mabel's in Champaign, which was a venue, and I went to college in Champaign, so it was like the home gig, you know. But we had a party after the show, and they came over to our house, and when they left, they stole like meat from our freezer. And we were like, that is so weird that those guys, like, what are they going to do? Take that back to Minnesota and cook some steaks? Like, what is wrong with those people? Yeah. You know? And then the other time we played with them was in DeKalb, Illinois, and it was an afternoon gig, and they got completely wasted. And it was one of the famous, the Replacements could be the best band in the world or the worst band in the world, and sometimes within the same song. And it was one of those shows where they just went off the rails. They stopped playing their own songs, and they tried to fake their way through all these covers, and they would get like a verse and a chorus, and they'd go to the bridge and not know how it went and just stop. You know, it was just, they had a lot of gigs like that. They were like the most famous band for shooting themselves in the foot of the entire 80s, I believe. So, so I always was doing dual things. I was interested in media throughout high school and college, and then I also was playing in bands and having record labels, you know, setting up our own record labels and stuff like that, and trying to kind of see the industry from every angle, I guess, you know. So it's been nice, and I still do it today. You know, I still have bands today. I still have a band. We play, and the expectations become lowered, but you do it because it's like so fun to create. And so now, even when I meet a young band or a band that's been around, like I can kind of relate a little more, or have a little sense of like, I know kind of what it's like to be doing what they're doing, you know?
Yeah. Well, my niece is in a band right now. She's been in probably about 8 years now. And she started when she was about 19 years old. Mm-hmm. When she was about 12, she discovered she had this natural gift for drumming. She went to a performing arts high school and junior high, and the thing was that she was, you know, playing violin, and she did okay, but you could tell she was not into it. But gear behind that drum set, oh my goodness! And then she was playing with somebody, and the singer was really good, but then that singer moved away, and so finally they decided just to have my niece do the lead vocals, and there was born her band, and she's put out probably about 5 albums now, and her boyfriend also does music as well. In fact, her boyfriend's band's been on Late Night with Seth Meyers, as well as the Tonight Show with Jimmy Fallon.
Oh, who are they? Who's this band?
My niece's band is called Tchotchke. They used to be called Pinky Pinky. And then her boyfriend's band is called Lemon Twigs. The Lemon Twigs, both of those bands are influenced by the late 60s to early 80s rock sounds. So
we play the Lemon Twigs. They were our artists to watch at XPN about a year and a half ago. And so he's not one of the two brothers.
Yeah, it is. My niece is dating Brian, who's the one of the lead singers.
Brian, yeah.
In fact, Brian's got a solo album coming out.
He's got a new solo record. Yeah. I mean, that's awesome. That's the kind of music that I am naturally I love. You know, that's me on a personal level. That sound is exactly the kind of stuff that I love. It's the kind of stuff I make. That's that very 60s influenced, power pop, punk influenced, you know, kind of the best of stuff from the 60s, some of the energy of the 70s, and then a little bit of the college radio kind of vibe of the 80s, and you roll all that together and you get a band like the Lemon Twigs. Totally.
Yeah, because
that's great.
One of the songs, the Lemon Twigs, sound like the Stylistics vocal style wise. And and then another song, they sound kind of Bee Gees-ish, but not exactly. Yeah. And then other songs, there's that vocal range that just blows me away each time I hear one of their new songs.
Yeah, no, great band. I always picked up a little bit of like like a Wings vibe too from a lot of their stuff. And
yeah.
then, they'll do like the 70s shuffle. They'll do like a little T-Rex move in some of their songs and stuff. And they have branched out from the early days. When I was at the Current in Minneapolis, we started playing that band. Must have been coming up on 10 years now. It's 9 years probably since their first couple of records came out. So that's cool. I know I've heard the name Tchotchke before as well. So maybe I've encountered your niece's band, but a singing drummer. Now that's a tough one because it's challenging from a presentation perspective, because you're kind of locked to the drum kit, trying to Phil Collins or Don Henley it, right?
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, it's just, there's very few that can do it. I mean, who was it? Jigsaw that sang Sky High, their lead singer Des Dyer was the drummer and the lead singer. And then, the Four Seasons, when they had December 1963, Oh What a Night, it was, the drummer that did the lead vocals on that song rather than
Really?
Frankie Valli. Yeah.
I did not know that. Look at this trivia. Also, I believe the Romantics, What I Like About You, is another example of a singing drummer.
Yeah, I didn't know that. Wow.
Yeah. There you go. That could be your new podcast is tracking down drummers that sing.
Yeah, and then, of course, Karen Carpenter did, too. And she hated being in front on the stage. She preferred being behind the drum kit. Yeah.
And she's a pretty good drummer. Some of those records, she could hit.
Oh yeah. There was online. There's the national TV debut of what was then called the Dick Carpenter Trio, and I think Karen was about 18 years old. Richard was 21, 22. And Dennis James says, "Here they are, making their national television debut, the Dick Carpenter Trio." And she's singing and playing drums on Dancing in the Street, the old Martha Reeves song. Yeah, and I was like, this is cool. Pretty cool. It's got kind of like that, psychedelic organ in the background with the drums and whatnot. And wow. It didn't sound really much like the Carpenters sound that we had, but it was just really cool to see something a little bit different from those artists. Yeah, totally. And just think how rare it was in 1968 or whatever to have, first of all, there weren't as many women in bands as musicians, let alone a singing drummer. That's awesome. So. Oh, yeah. We're talking with radio personality, program director, and musician Jim McGuinn. And next time we'll find out where he was first heard on the air.